Hello everyone, I'm Nicole Spohr, and today I'm introducing the Felt Reindeer from my Spellbinders Felt Stitch and Create collection. So this collection features 8 SKUs perfect for autumn and Christmas, and today we're going to be putting together the Felt Reindeer. I'm going to walk you through the steps to put together the reindeer from start to finish. In addition, this one has been stuffed, as you can see, with a little bit of polyester fiber fill. You can also put it together just flat as is. I am going to be showing you that on camera, and I've used some holly and berries from another collection to adorn his little ear. So this is from the Felt Star Snowman, and you can totally mix and match. You can choose to put the hat on the reindeer or not. All of my examples today do feature the hat, but I will show some ways to use it without the hat in future videos. Also, this is going to be a separate video on my channel, but you do not have to make everything dimensional. This is stitched, the felt reindeer is stitched flat to another piece of felt and turned into this adorable little pillow for pillow decor. I will have lots of examples of other ways to utilize your felt stitching that doesn't incorporate a plush type of stitched piece. So stay tuned and let's put together our felt reindeer. We're going to start by cutting out the pieces for our felt reindeer to create the plush. Now you can mix and match and embellish with other pieces from other sets. So here you can see on my desk I have die cut and laid out the pieces that you need for the reindeer. We have die cut each of the antlers. Then I'm going to move this hat out of the way. We have 2 pieces for the hat, the front and the back, 2 pieces for the brim, and 1 piece for the pom-pom. So here is the pom-pom die cut piece, the main hat piece, and the brim. And you need 2 of the main hat piece and brim if you're making the dimensional plush as we're doing here. Then we have the ear piece. We need to die cut 2 of those and 2 of the inside of the ear. 1 for each side of the head. For the head, there are 2 separate pieces. The one with the oval is the front and the other one is the back of the head. To layer on the face, we also have the layering piece and then the nose. The nose doesn't have any die cut holes in it because you can either glue this in place or you can tack it down with some stitches. I tend to like to tack it down with stitches, but glue works as well. Then we have the eyes. That piece die cuts both of the eyes. For the body of the reindeer, we want to die cut the front and the back. So we want to die cut this twice. We will be sandwiching the body in between the head pieces. Then we have 1 of the layering hooves pieces. Then we have the legs. We want to die cut those twice. And then we have the layering piece for that as well. Those are going to go on the front. We also have the layering piece for the belly of our reindeer. Now that we have all of our pieces, we're ready to start stitching. We are going to start our stitching with the face of our reindeer. I am layering on the cream colored layered piece onto the darker felt, and we are going to stitch this all the way around, going up and down every other stitching hole. By going up and down every other stitching hole, this is going to allow us, when we get back to where we started, to fill in each, because we will either go around again or you can back up and go around again. That is going to fill in each and every one. This piece lines up with the base face layering piece very easily. and it allows you to have all of that wonderful dimension for our felt reindeer. I chose to match my floss color to the color of felt that I'm stitching. You can also stitch contrast depending on what look you like. Play around with different floss colors to really customize it and make it your own. As we get back to where we started, I am simply going to go around again. As a reminder, if you ever need to slow the video down, you can do that by changing the settings here on YouTube. I did speed it up, but you can always pause, catch up, and then continue playing the video. I do this just to save a little bit of time because it does take a minute to stitch all the way around. One of the things I find the most useful when felt stitching is to always think about the layers and how they go together. Once we get back to where we started, I'm going to tie this into a little knot. Because this is hidden on the inside, I don't have to worry about it looking super neat, although it does look pretty good. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tack the nose down in place. Now remember, you can also save this to the end and use a little glue if you want to glue that down. Sometimes I like to tack it down with a little glue and then maybe even go in and add a stitch to help it stay in place. Along the top of the nose, I am going to do a little white or cream colored stitch here, almost like a little highlight on the nose. It adds a decorative element, but it also helps tack it down in place. I feel like taking your time on the face of the felt critters. It is much like with your die cut pieces where the image may have a face, you know, your critters and things, or even stamped images. Taking your time with the face of the images and making sure that it really is expressive is what gives these characters so much of that cute factor that I love. Now, I want to remind you that when I am stitching, I like to use 3 strands of DMC embroidery floss. So in your DMC, there are 6 strands of floss. I separate that into 3, and I use 3 exclusively for my stitching, for felt stitching. And if I ever use less, things like detail for faces, sometimes I like to add eyelashes to the eyes of my reindeer or fox or whatever that might be. I will let you know that in the video. While I have my cream embroidery floss, I'm going to go ahead and stitch the cream body of the reindeer to the body, front body portion. And we're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to go up and down every other stitch and then go around again and fill in all of those areas. Now, once we have the belly stitched to the front panel of the body of the reindeer, we are going to take the front and the back pieces and we are going to stitch these together. I like to have the body done so that I can sandwich that in between the head pieces when we stitch the head together. We also have the legs of the reindeer, and if you want those to kind of be tucked underneath the head, you can do that as well. Keep in mind that this is only a suggestion for how to put together the critter. You might come up with other ways that you like as well. I'm showing what works best for me. You can choose to stuff your felt plush in many different ways. My current favorite way is to use quilt batting, although I am using a polyester fiberfill for this one. But polyester fiberfill is an option, and also you can cut up your scraps of felt into small pieces and use those as stuffing. If you want, you can use just a little bit of regular liquid glue to glue the eyes in place. You can also use hot glue. I will tell you that I find that the best thing to do is just to tack them down with a little stitch if you want to make sure that they don't go anywhere. My personal favorite is to take some white embroidery floss and do a little stitch through the felt eye. It gives the eye the look of a highlight and it's going to stay in place. Now I'm going to take the body pieces for my reindeer, and again, 3 strands of embroidery floss, but we're using a floss color that closely matches the body of the reindeer, and we are going to go up and down every other stitch most of the way around. You may notice that I started near the top That was very much on purpose because that part of the reindeer body is going to be sandwiched between the two head pieces, and I can hide the knot when I tie this off. When I need to hide the knot in plush felt stitching, I do start stitching in between the two layers of felt, as you saw me do there, and I'm going to continue stitching all the way around, leaving a small opening in this case because we are going to stuff this with a tiny bit of polyester fiberfill. I do want to mention, when stuffing your critters or your plush dimensional ornaments, you want to use a small amount of polyester fiberfill so that you don't run the risk of tearing these stitching holes. If you overstuff an image, felt is something that will tear. It is not like a more durable fabric, cotton fabric, if you will, where it's going, those stitches are going to withstand stuffing it super tight. So it's going to be a very loose stuff, and it's going to be not a lot of product. That's why I often suggest, if you don't have polyester fiberfill or you don't want to grab any, just cut up those scraps of felt left over from die cutting your image into small little pieces and stuff those down inside of your plush. Or if you have quilt batting or you want to just pick up some quilt batting, which you'll see in some of my other videos, I also like to use that as it's a little bit flatter. So I am carefully here stuffing my reindeer, and I'm using a stuffing tool to move that into the leg a little bit. You will notice that was the teeniest, tiniest little bit of stuffing. It is not a lot. Something else that I have seen makers do, I personally have not, but I don't see anything wrong with it, is if you don't have polyester fiberfill, quilt batting, and you don't want to cut up those extra pieces of felt, but you have some cotton balls laying around, these are so small that you could just kind of tear up cotton balls and stuff those inside too. So really make do with the things that you have. Once we have our image stuffed, we are going to go ahead and finish stitching around this to close it up. Now, there are pieces in each of the sets that do not have stitching holes. They are simply too small to provide stitching holes on them, and it really wouldn't work. So those are things like the nose and the eyes that you saw previously, or the hooves for the reindeer. For all of those, you can either glue them in place or you can choose to tack them down. It is completely up to you how you want to do that. I have done it both ways, and either one is totally fine. Something that I don't know that I've mentioned yet is if the liquid glue doesn't work great for you, and I often don't use liquid glue, I've shown it here. Don't be afraid to use hot glue either. It may be a tiny bit more messy, but if you're comfortable using it, which I am, I never worry that anything is going to pop off when I use hot glue. Now, when I am stitching around a part of the felt image, you'll notice that I tied that off, but I've only stitched around every other one. This is on purpose. I didn't think I had enough thread or embroidery floss left to go around and fill in those holes the second time. So yes, you are going to go around every other stitch, leaving that little opening, stuff it, close it up, and then if you have enough embroidery floss, you can then go around again and close in those every other stitches. In this case, I went ahead and tied it off after going around once, grabbed more floss, and I'm going around again. This is because I don't like to stop mid-stitch. I would rather waste a little bit of embroidery floss, as it's inexpensive, than try to have to tie it off, and it's just a whole mess. To me, this is much easier. We're going to continue to stitch around this and close it up. Before we start stitching the legs together, I do need to add the mouth to the face of the reindeer. I noticed that I had forgotten. There are stitching holes for this, which make it very easy to stitch the little mouth. For this, I personally like to use a nice contrasting color, a dark brown, or in this case, I did use black, and we are going to stitch up and down every other hole. You will notice that if you are familiar with the term back stitching that you would do in other needlework, this is not a traditional back stitch. It is more of a running stitch, and that is on purpose because when we stitch a dimensional plush together, a back stitch would not leave you with a nice result on the back. So I always like to do this running stitch. That's why when I stitch around once, I go up and down every other or every hole, up and down instead of doing a back stitch. And I just continue that with any of my felt stitching as I feel like it gives a nicer result. It's just something I've gotten into the habit of when working with these felt pieces. And there is the little mouth. Look at that face. Isn't it cute? So now let's go ahead and take some of our white embroidery floss, and remember that tacking stitch that I said I like to do for the eyes? We are just going to do a little stitch through that felt. There are not stitching holes or anything like that, but we are simply going to just tack each of the eyes down. And again, it serves not only as a way to secure the eyes to the face or the nose to the face, but it serves as a little highlight, giving the face tons of character. I just love how it looks. There we go. So cute. And again, we're just going to tie those off on the back. I don't worry too much about having the back of it look perfect. You can see that it definitely doesn't look perfect. It is going to be sandwiched between the two layers of felt, and we're never going to see it. So for me, this is absolutely fine. Now, one of my other favorite things to do, and remember I talked about I use 3 strands of floss for everything, and I tell you if I'm not, I love to add some eyelashes to the face. For this, I'm using 1 strand of floss so that the eyelashes are not quite so heavy. I am starting at the eye and then just making some little long stitches coming out from each. This is another way to customize the face that is completely optional. You do not have to do this, but it does only take a second, as you can see, to just do a few little long stitches. And I just love spending that little bit of extra time on the face. Something I talk about in each of these felt stitching videos is that you can customize your felt pieces with all kinds of embellishments. Think sequins, seed beads, buttons. You could replace the eyes with buttons if you wanted to. You can add ribbons, trims, all kinds of cute little embellishments to completely customize your felt pieces. Think about them and think about the things that you may have in your stash. Let's go ahead and glue the ear pieces together. These also do not have stitching holes, so you can glue them together or you can tack them down. I have done both. In this case, I glued the light piece to the dark, and we're going to let that sit for a minute and dry. Let's take our two leg pieces each and stitch together. These are so thin that I recommend not placing any polyester fiber fill, quilt batting, or any kind of stuffing in between. I think that there's just no need, and it would be very hard to stitch them up. If you've seen the pumpkin or acorn house stitches that have the leaves where I have stitched the 2 halves of the leaves together, think of this very much the same, where just adding the stitching detail to these 2 layers of felt gives them that stability that we're looking for. I'm going up and down each one. We're going to stitch each leg exactly like this. Now, I don't worry too much about tying it off. However, you will notice that I started up at the top of the leg because I am going to tack those legs down to the body and likely hide that knot underneath the head, or at least on the back side of each leg, which will be tacked to the body. I like to kind of tack it to the body either in that section where the head will overlap the body, or where I've already stitched around the perimeter of the body. Always kind of thinking ahead to where we can hide our stitching for a beautiful seamless look. With the legs being separate from the front legs being separate from the body, this is also going to give you the ability, if you want to take the star or the tree from the gingerbread felt set, you could have your reindeer holding on to that star or the tree. You could also tuck the candy cane, even though it's very large, and make it look like the reindeer is holding on to an oversized candy cane. And maybe sew it all down to a pillow, or even make it a large ornament. There are endless ways to create with these pieces, and I want you to really think about mixing and matching among all of the different sets. So now we're going to take the hooves and we're going to glue those down in place. Again, you can glue these with liquid, hot glue, or use some little tacking stitches to secure those. Let's go ahead and stitch around the other leg and then we can move on to putting it all together. While I'm gluing down the front hooves, I will go ahead and glue the back ones down. Each of these layering pieces just contributes to the dimension and cute factor of this set. Now, while I did make this Rudolph, I want you to keep in mind that you can change the color of the nose and make this any kind of reindeer. I'm also adding the hat to my reindeer, but you don't have to. Maybe you want to do Rudolph and Clarice from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You could do a little bow at the top of one of the reindeer's heads and give her the brown nose. You could have Rudolph. There are, again, lots of ways to customize these cute little images. Maybe you want to sew a couple of them to another piece of felt or fabric and make a little pillow. As I showed at the beginning of the video, I stitched one of these reindeers down to a pillow and added some text stitching. You could stitch this to a little canvas bag or a tote bag and customize it that way. I want to encourage you to really think outside the box and think of ways you can utilize. Okay, it's time to stitch the head together. Now, in the head, we do need to sandwich the antlers and the ears. This sometimes can be a little tricky. I do have some binder clips here that I am using to secure the antlers and the ears in place. If you want them to be even more secure and you're like, I do not want to try to hold on to all of this, you could use straight pins if you are a sewer and you have some pins handy. You could also just glue those down. I would make sure that if you glue those to one of the pieces of felt before you start stitching, please make sure that the glue doesn't extend to where you are stitching with your needle and thread, as it could get tacky and hard to push your needle through that gluey mess. So if you do tack them in place, and I will tell you that I have done that many times where I just put a little bit of glue so it stays put for me while I am gluing, just make sure it's far enough inside of the head and not a whole lot, because if you put too much glue, it could possibly seep through the felt. It is a fabric textile, and too much glue could make a little bit of a mess there. So I started up at the top and I am working my way around. Yes, we do want to stuff the head as well as the body. And when we get down to the bottom of our reindeer head, we do want to overlap it or sandwich the body in between the front and back of the head so that we can secure it. There are stitching holes that serve as a guide to line that up. I use them more as a guideline as opposed to actually lining them up. Now, you totally can. I don't want to tell you not to, but just so you know, I don't do mine that way. I just make sure that the body is far enough into the head that those little stitching holes don't show. In fact, it wasn't quite far enough up there, and I did leave it in the video so you could see that I unthreaded my needle, pulled that stitch out, and I am going to adjust the head so it's a little further up in the body, and then stitch and tack it in place. All we want to do is make sure that our needle is going to go through the same holes on the front of the head as the back, with the body sandwiched in between. We are going to stitch around, again, same thing as before, up and down every other hole for that running stitch, leaving a little opening at some point to put a little polyester fiber fill in. Again, we do not want to overstuff, but we do want our head to have a little dimension since we did choose to put some polyester fiber fill in the body of our reindeer. Where it connects to the body probably does take the most amount of time. Once that's secure, you're golden. And then the other place is around the antlers and the ears. That can serve to be just a little bit, you know, fiddly, I suppose. But once you get it, it's not bad at all. I am going to speed up going around the head. Please feel free to slow that down. But it is just every other, making sure that you're sandwiching the ears and the antlers and of course the body of your reindeer. When we get closer back up to where we started, I will show stuffing the little bit of polyester fiber fill inside. And sometimes your needle comes unthreaded and you have to rethread it. Or in my case, that's what happens. Okay, we have a little tiny opening. We want to take a little teeny tiny bit of polyester fiber fill and stuff that inside the head. Gently, gently. We do not want to pull too much. This is also one of the reasons I kind of like the quilt batting. If you've watched some of the other tutorials where I've used the quilt batting instead of the polyester fiber fill, you'll notice that I think it doesn't pull the stitching holes quite as much, but it is completely up to you. I have done it both ways, and I've actually used it with some scraps of the wool felt as well, and I like that. So it's kind of just a personal preference. That's what I should say. Once we have it stuffed, we're going to finish closing it up, and I will speed through stitching around the perimeter of this so that we can get to adorning Rudolph with his Santa hat. Now, what I want to say is if you decide to leave the hat off, which it is completely optional, you would be basically done at this point. You could thread a little bit of some gold twine, that Vivant twine that Spellbinders carries through the top, tie it into a little knot, and you have an ornament or gift tag. You can customize it with other types of tags. I personally love the Better Press Essentials tags that say do not open until December 25th. So really, you can kind of consider at this point you can be finished. I did finish by taking my needle in between the two layers. That's how I started as well, tying it into a knot when I get back to the starting point and trimming that away. As I've mentioned or shown in other videos, that is how you bury the knot and hide it in a dimensional plush. In this case, the hat is going to cover that up, so you aren't going to see it. We need the front and the back of the Santa hat, so we have a red piece for the front and the back. I personally like to stitch it kind of like this. So I lay it out to get a visual idea of where everything is going to go before I start stitching. One pom-pom piece, and it does have stitching holes in it, but I will tell you that you can just sandwich that pom-pom between the two layers. And as long as you are catching those stitching holes between the two, I don't worry about lining them up perfectly, although you totally can. You can do the hat in a couple of ways. I don't think there is really a better or right or wrong way, I should say. I decided for this one to stitch the two red pieces first, and then we'll stitch the brim of the hat on. You can also stitch the brim to each red piece individually and then stitch them together. The part that makes it easier to stitch the red in this case is I like to use red for red and white for white, and so I did separate it in that instance. Now, I almost forgot to add the pom-pom here, so I will have to take out a couple of stitches and sandwich that white pom-pom in the top of the hat. You can see that I instantly realized that here and had to back it up and sandwich that little white pom-pom. It could also be more of a stocking cap if you wanted it to be, that doesn't have a pom-pom on it. I said Santa hat, but it's really more of a stocking cap, I suppose. So now I am just going to make sure that the white pom-pom is in between the two layers before I start stitching. Pushing it down so that those stitching holes are hidden. You can line them up as well, but I do find it tends to be a little fiddly that way. Something to remember when you are stitching with felt is that because it is fabric, you can always pull the stitches out if you need to and redo it. Now, I would say make sure when you're pulling them out, you're not tugging super hard because again, as I've mentioned in other videos, that felt can tear, kind of unlike fabric. Fabric will be a little bit sturdier than felt in that case, but you can always back them out, which is amazing. The other great thing about these Spellbinders dies is they do come untabbed. One of the beautiful things about this line from Spellbinders is that it allows anyone who loves to stitch with felt, especially for any kind of seasonal holiday project, that you can easily do that without templates or patterns. It gives you or provides you with these stitching holes to make it easy to line them up and stitch them together. There's no guesswork on the maker's part. That is what I love about stitching dies. I am just going around the perimeter of the hat, making sure that it is tacked down in place. Same as any of my stitching with felt, every other stitching hole, and then going around again to fill in any of those or the holes that we skip when we do that running stitch around the first time. Once we come around to where we started, I am just going to tie this off into a little knot, and I'm not going to worry too much about it showing because we are going to have the brim of the hat that goes in place next. Now for this, I am changing to some white embroidery floss and we are going to stitch through all the layers, just making sure that we're lining up with the appropriate holes. Same thing as before, every other stitch with that running stitch and then filling in as we go around the second time. I like to kind of get it going and then place the piece on the back. Once you have it in place and have a few of those stitches down, it should be good to go. Remember that we are working around the antlers and the ears. That does tend to make it just a tiny fiddly where the embroidery floss can get tangled around it. So you'll notice that flipping motion I do with my wrist a lot. I do that not only to check to make sure that I am lining up with the appropriate coordinating hole, but to make sure that it kind of lessens the amount of times that I might get tangled in other parts of the felt piece. The more you get stitched together, the sturdier the piece becomes. Look how cute our little Rudolph is. We're going to continue stitching around the brim of the hat. There, I'm caught on the pom-pom. And until we have all of the stitching holes filled. I feel like the face and taking that little bit of extra time and floss to add the highlight to the nose, the highlight to the eyes, and of course the eyelashes just makes the sweet little face come to life. At this point, if you want to take other dies from some of the other SKUs from the Felt Stitch and Create collection, this is where you can take the holly berries and leaves from the snowman, or maybe you want to take, as I mentioned earlier, the Christmas tree or star from the gingerbread person. You can incorporate those into this shape or into this felt ornament. You could have Rudolph holding some of those things. You could add the holly berries and leaves to the brim of the hat. That's one of my favorite things to do. You can leave the hat off altogether and put some little bells. If you have little dimensional bells, you can hang those from the antlers or from the neck of Rudolph. Have fun with it, customize it the way that it works for you, and it will give you a beautiful result every single time. One of the other things that I think would be absolutely adorable is the monogram letter stitching dies from Spellbinders, obviously made to die cut from paper. Try cutting them from felt. You could add a monogram letter that Rudolph is holding and customize these for kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, or just yourself or friends or family. I think that would be a wonderful way to add a customized felt stitch plush to anyone for the holiday season. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this introductory video for the felt reindeer. The supplies I used to create this ornament are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Please be sure to check out my channel, Nichol Spohr, and see more ideas using the Felt Stitch and Create collection. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you so much for joining me today for another paper crafting tutorial. I love being able to share with this incredible community of crafters. I want to give a huge shout out and special thank you to my amazing Patreon members. If you're interested in joining Patreon, please click the link in the description underneath the video here on YouTube. Patreon is a private community where you can support more of what I do. There is exclusive content, information, and behind-the-scenes content. Top-tier members will receive a handmade birthday card during your birthday month, access to D-Stash, and monthly exclusive lives, plus so much more. We would love to have you join our growing community.